Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 404 show. Today is Friday, September 9th. My name is not Jeff Backlor. My name is Russ Frushtick. And I'm not joined by Jeff Backlor. I'm joined by Chris Plante of The Verge, who has joined us out of the kindness of his heart while Jeff is on honeymoon somewhere in the Alps, I believe. Welcome, Chris.
I would rather be where he is.
Yeah, it's somewhere not in America.
Okay.
It might be the Alps. Alps is not in America, right?
Sure, yeah. That leaves a lot of places.
Yeah. Let's name them.
Okay, Tokyo.
Spain.
London.
Barcelona.
Okay, I think we've officially lost half the audience.
Indeed. Welcome, everyone. Pretty big week for technology. We've been in a bit of a dry spell the last few weeks / months in terms of like big tech news. Certainly there's been speculation and stuff like that that's been going on, but there hasn't been anything like concrete until this week when it all sort of came tumbling down upon us. Obviously, the Apple press conference followed immediately thereafter by the Sony press conference, and there was a lot of stuff that came out of that. So I guess, you know, this being a tech podcast, let's dig into Apple a bit. Chris, do you know that there was an Apple press conference this week?
It turns out I do, because it's my job to care.
Good. Well, I don't know if it's your job to care, but it is your job to watch it and write about it. So
Yeah, when I say care, I mean like be available emotionally to cover it and not just like crawl under my desk and weep.
What's the sort of 5-minute spiel on what they announced? And don't even do 5 minutes. Do an elevator. I'm in an elevator with you. I've just gotten in.
Okay.
I'm holding in a fart, so
Okay.
I'm trying to be very polite.
Okay.
Tell me what just got announced at Apple.
Okay, here is the elevator pitch. We're pressing the 19th floor. Now the doors are closing. Okay, so there's a new Apple Watch. And if you care about Apple Watches, that's probably a thing. And if you don't, there's nothing so special about it. You're going to be like, oh man, finally, now I can get that Apple Watch.
Is there literally anything, sorry to jump in, is there literally anything about the Apple Watch that would like maybe cause someone to be like, okay, I'm getting one now?
It has like GPS features. Like, no, I personally don't understand who the Apple Watch is for.
Sure.
But the elevator is moving up. We'll get back to that.
Okay, fine.
There's also, more importantly, the iPhone 7.
Yes.
And the Mondo-size iPhone 7. And the big change, is that it's faster. It comes in the old kind of like Darth Vader mask black, which apparently scratches easier than the other colors. And there's also an improved camera, yet again, especially on the larger phone, which has the like a telephoto lens to go along with the normal lens.
Yeah.
And it uses artificial intelligence to create images that, in theory, look as good as, say, using like a mid-range compact camera, like a Fuji X100T, which is the camera that I recommend.
Really? You think it's comparable to that?
No, I don't. But like that's what people are saying. That's
also artificial intelligence, really?
I mean, that's the line from the from the Apple press event, right?
Yeah.
Like,
we thought they were going to take over the world, but instead they're just making our pictures a little nicer.
That's going to be it. In their quest to make our pictures nicer, they'll accidentally take over the world.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's also no headphone jack anymore. There's just the Lightning port, and if you want to charge your phone while also using traditional headphones, wired headphones, you have to get a special dongle for that, which, if that sounds awful, wait till you see a photo of it. Because it's just as bad as you picture.
It looks like a compact flash reader. That's how big the dongle is. It's enormous.
I don't want to say that this is a deal breaker, because this phone is like, it's still a great iPhone, right? Like, iPhones are still, if you like distance yourself from all of the hype and the annual releases and yada yada yada, like, it still is this like tiny little slab of like metal and future that you put in your pocket, and it does all these wonderful things.
Yeah.
That said, there are a lot of other slabs that are comparable. and don't. It just feels so hostile taking away my headphone jack. And I know that there's a dongle, and I know that I will lose it immediately because I lose anything that is smaller than like my pinky finger.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have not made a pre-order on this phone, and the reason why is that I'm just not sure that I like the idea of not being able to plug into my phone without knowing where a dongle is at all times.
Did you mention the water resistant aspects of it?
Yes, it's water and dust resistant is the claim. I am curious how true that is. As someone who has had to clean out grime from my iPhone, the lightning port with a paperclip before. Like
right.
stuff.
So why would that be any different? It's the same port, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm curious to see if people have that problem.
It's a space age polymer, perhaps.
Yes, it's probably a space age polymer.
I saw in the commercial, the only representation of the waterproofness was, I guess they threw a water balloon at it. And that looked pretty good. I mean, I wouldn't normally do that with my phone, so I guess that's a plus. But the headphone thing, I mean, you were questioning whether it's a deal breaker. I think for me, it's a deal breaker. Like,
I think that is acceptable.
I've talked about a lot on this show. Like, I'm a big Apple phone guy. I like Apple computers as well. But every single day when I use my phone, I am plugging in my headphones that I like and are comfortable and don't need a battery. And the idea of giving that up in favor of some features which are like nice, but not at all mandatory seems totally crazy.
Yeah.
Like, totally crazy. Like cutting off your ear despite your face or whatever.
Yeah, and I know people will say the dongle is there, but like it's just such a silly step. The idea, I mean, it's why Apple has, the ultra thin MacBook too, right? Where you can also attach a dongle to it. And it's I just don't understand it. The idea of we're going to trim this itty bitty amount of space off of a thing that's already small at the sacrifice of just a really obvious feature. I mean, I know that's not why they say they're doing this. Like, they have their own bizarre logic for why this is a necessary step. But it just doesn't track for me, the idea of losing core features to remove the, tiniest fraction of additional space.
Let's talk about their quote, because I was traveling while this was all happening, so I sort of picked up bits and bobs of it. But as I understand it, the quote that they go back to about removing the headphone jack is that it took courage. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, that's false. Courage is not, that's not what the word means. I think you could say bold.
Yes, I would agree with bold.
Courage, courage implies that they, I think, are doing some great thing for the betterment of our species, and it's certainly not that.
I mean, I think if you work at a company like Apple, a company that is obviously driven by profits and driven by the success of their products, and I would imagine are pretty heavily focus tested, at least in terms of the feature sets, you could see how someone in that environment could do, let's say, 50 focus tests where they say, hey, we're going to remove the headphone jack from your phone. And every single person in the room is like, don't do that. That's an awful idea. And they ignore it. And that person is like, wow, we're being courageous by ignoring these 50 focus tests that said it's a bad idea.
It's such a smug Silicon Valley thing.
Yeah. It's their version of the most courageous they could possibly be, is that.
Well, because the assumption is that all of their customers are wrong.
Yeah.
And that the courage comes from doing something the customer doesn't want. Which is that's, I mean, not the courage part, but that is a fair line of thinking. The customer doesn't always know what they want.
Sure.
And it is your responsibility to give that to them. I mean, that's how we got, a phone that doesn't have buttons on it.
Yeah.
But I think every example that I can think of where they took something away from the customer it was very obvious what they were replacing it with could be perceived as better. Like, yeah, I really wanted buttons on my phone when I switched to an iPhone. I really enjoyed my Sidekick that I could tap all of the letters into while I was texting. At the same time, it was immediately obvious to me that there were benefits to not having the basic buttons and switching to touch control.
And sort of on the same token, I mean, you look at the Lightning port. So the Lightning port, granted, a lot of people are pissed off because it's like not a universal USB input, but compared to what Apple was using before, which was the wider, like clicky, weird charging thing, it is better. Like you can plug it in any way you want. Like you don't have to like plug it in a certain way like USB. So it was like at least you understood the trade-off. And here I don't know what getting rid of the headphone jack gives me. I honestly don't know.
It reminds me of, have you ever, this is very judgmental, but have you ever been to like a friend's house who has like a really modernist design aesthetic that they've chosen to decorate with? So
I'm picturing like the Ferris Bueller, Cameron's dad's house, that kind of place.
Yeah, kind of like that, where it's like, they have like chairs that are shaped like eggs, but they're not comfortable. Yes. And they only allow themselves to have like one bookshelf, and it's like with like 5 books. And at a certain point, like the place ceases to be a place that you actually want to spend time in. Yeah. That's kind of how I feel about
it's a form over function
decisions.
Thing.
It's right. Where it's like, yeah, I get it. Like there's one less slot on the bottom of this thing. It makes the design a little bit better for someone who like all they think about is design. But the actual experience of using it becomes like a chore. Yeah. And at that point, you have to ask yourself, like, is design getting in the way of just normal people using this thing? Yeah.
Okay, so to wrap this Apple section up, to prediction time.
Okay.
Will the blowback be strong enough for Apple to reverse course next year and include a headphone jack?
I don't think so. I just don't think they're that sort of company.
You think they're too stubborn?
Yeah, I definitely think they're too stubborn. I would say that, like, the Apple Watch kind of shows that. Like, the continual push on the Apple Watch, without, I feel like, really understanding what people's issues are with it, kind of encapsulates Apple's willingness to retreat further into its own design philosophy rather than consider, what people actually want.
Yeah, although they have admitted, I mean, it feels like they have sort of admitted failure with the Apple Watch, whereas with iPhone, obviously, it's still it's not as successful as it once was in terms of growth, but it's still successful, whereas the Apple Watch, like, they took, 2 years to sort of re-up it, and even then, I mean, I think it's clear that they consider it as a side piece. It's not like a primary device.
Yeah, I also do wonder if, so there are all these rumors about the iPhone 8 already.
Right.
For next year, which we'll see if that is what actually happens. I mean, that would skip an S phase, I guess.
Yeah.
But
this feels like an S phase, I think, is the point that everyone has. It's like, this feels like a stopgap phase right now.
And the 8 is supposed to be, a pretty significant leap. At least is how the rumors make it sound. And I kind of wonder if the reason that we're seeing the absence of the headphone now is trying to get that out of the way.
Oh, yeah. Maybe.
And then it's like next time it'll be like, well, yeah, there's no headphone jack. We're used to that.
Yeah, it's
and
not
here's
a new
like
story
all
anymore.
of these great features, and there's not as much bad blood when that leap comes around.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me seems logical, considering they're playing such a long game in terms of how they introduce features for their hardware, that it's the only explanation I can think of why they decided to do it this time around.
They should just have the camera AI sing to you, I think. Just
as it makes your photos so beautiful.
Perfect pitch. All right, well, that pretty much wraps up Apple. I'm not planning on going nuts on it. It sounds like, Chris, you are not either. I like my headphones, my old-timey headphones. Another big event that happened, no joke, an hour after Apple ended was this Sony event that happened in New York City, announcing what had for a while been the Neo, the PlayStation Neo, and now we know it as the PlayStation 4 Pro. So it's kind of a weird device, and I don't think it's quite what people were expecting. What was your take on it, Chris?
I feel like I might have been like out of the loop on expectations, because this feels like kind of exactly what I thought it would be. Like I didn't expect it to be announced that it would be available this year.
Yeah, that was a surprise.
The basic gist is there's a slimmer normal Xbox, or thank you,
Close
a slimmer
enough.
normal PlayStation 4, and that's just gonna retain the normal PS4 branding. And there's PS4 Pro, and it has more power, but all the details are pretty vague in terms of what that power does. Like, some games will look better on a traditional 1080p HD TV, but how they'll look better is unclear, and it doesn't sound like we can expect it to improve things like frame rate, but there might be like better maybe anti-aliasing or better textures. They're not really telling us what it means, and it seems like it might be up to each game developer to...
that was my impression as well. They like punted it to game developers.
Yeah, and then games will be in 4K, but I don't know like necessarily how true that is, or like what their definition of 4K is, because to run a game at 4K on like a mid to high end gaming PC is tough. Like you'll have to have a pretty solid setup. So there's, I guess it sounds like they might have a solution for up-resing to 4K.
Yeah, that's my impression as well.
Yeah, like how you up-res a DVD or Blu-ray for your 4K TV. It's not actually a native 4K output.
Right.
In which case, that's neat, but like, what does that really look like, and what does that look like compared to native 4K?
You have a 4K TV, right?
I do, yeah.
And how much 4K content is there on the planet?
Not much, to say the least. So if you have 4K right now, I mean, this is, I think, the big selling point for it and why it could actually do well. If you have a 4K TV right now, you have to basically turn to a 4K Blu-ray player, UHD Blu-ray, which is expensive. The Blu-rays themselves are expensive. The cheapest option for Ultra HD Blu-ray player is, ironically, an Xbox One S. And the new PlayStation 4 Pro doesn't play those discs.
Right.
The other option you have, if you have a fast enough internet connection, is Netflix and Amazon. And there's like a slew of kind of like weird streaming apps that are kind of trying to get on that bandwagon.
And that's assuming you have the connection to support 4K streaming.
Not only that, but it's assuming that you have the right Netflix and Amazon apps. So not every Netflix and Amazon app is going to load 4K content.
Oh, wow.
And there's also like no good way to like force the apps to show that content. So for example, with me, I've tried to get it to show up on my PC, and it's unclear if that works. Like the traditional, these are our 4K things, don't automatically appear.
Sure.
And it doesn't work with my old Xbox One or PlayStation 4. So my only solution is to use the apps inside of my Samsung TV and then feed audio from my Samsung TV back to the receiver. Yeah, so it's...
What a mess.
It really is a mess. And having, in theory, a box that plugs into your TV that, like, will guarantee that the things that are streaming are going to be able to load 4K. You'll need... They are literally releasing either updates or new apps so that Netflix and Amazon on the PS4 Pro will show that. They had to do a kind of similar thing with Xbox One S. So complicated. But here is, like, again, the big thing. It's so difficult to really make use of your 4K TV that I think just being able to, like, go out in stores and say, hey, you have a 4K TV, you probably have not used it for 4K.
Right.
Like, there are pretty good odds, actually, that a portion of the audience is not using the 4K TV to, you know, its fullest potential. Here is a device that gives you a showpiece, essentially, to like when people come over and be like, oh look, this is what 4K looks like. The big question that I have though is like, it's kind of weirdly what PSVR could do for VR. Is it going to be a bad first impression, right? Like, PSVR is... I actually...
I don't think... If you've never used VR before, I think PSVR is a good starting point. But if you've used Oculus or whatever, it looks much more basic.
Yeah, I think PSVR is fine. I do wonder, though, if, like, up-resed 4K on a game that itself... I'm not sure if, like, they were always 1080p in the past. Like, it's just so bizarre, and it's so pedantic, and so, like, it's just getting so tech-heavy and spec-heavy. I mean, it's hilarious to me that we were promised 1080p last generation, essentially didn't get it.
Sure.
And now we can't even guarantee 1080p on the original iteration of Xbox One and PS4 on every game.
Right.
And suddenly, like... Sony's coming out and being like, yep, 4K gaming. And it's like, yo.
Yeah, well, they're not going to be like, hey, remember when we promised 1080p? No. It's really coming now.
Yeah.
Like, that's not a selling point.
They've been doing so well, and I'm not sure getting out in front of everybody and promising something that isn't... that has, like, so many asterisks next to it is, like, the smartest move.
Yeah. So, I'll say for me... So, I have a good PC, good gaming PC, but I do play a lot of games that come out on PC, on PS4, simply because the way, I've got a living room and a couch, and I want to chill on my couch, and obviously I could plug my computer into my TV, it's just not the way things are set up. So I play games like Deus Ex, which just came out on PS4, and it clearly struggles to run on PS4. Like, there's certain, like, city scenes that, like, the PS4 chugs with. And... there is something appealing to say, like, for games like that, or like a Dishonored or like a Battlefield, that, like, you're not going to go from 30 frames a second to 60 frames a second, but run a game pretty confidently and smoothly is pretty appealing to me. I just don't know how consistent that's going to be, honestly. Like, I don't know how many developers are going to offer that sort of support.
Yeah, and the weird thing for me is they've been saying... Again, it's so hard to tell, like, what is true right now. But the some of the stuff I've read is that if you play PS4 games on PS4 Pro, they'll run smoother, but they won't run better. And like, let me explain that. Like, what I mean is, if a PS4 normal game shoots for 30 frames per second, but doesn't always hit it, on PS4 Pro, in theory, it should, like, be locked on 30.
Exactly.
But you're not going to, like, it'll basically lock there. So even though it might have the extra power to shoot for, say 45 or 60 frames per second, they want to have some general parity with what's available on the PS4.
Yeah, well, you
especially
almost
in things
need,
like multiplayer games.
For multiplayer, you need that. Like, you can't have Call of Duty being 30 frames on one console and 60 on another.
Sure, but this is like... It's silly when you think about PC gaming, where if you have the extra power, you throw it at whatever you want. Like,
yeah, that's true.
It basically feels like we're getting closer and closer to PC gaming without the options.
It feels settings. Right. It feels like, it's still this walled off garden, which obviously has benefits insofar as, like, PC gaming can be a minefield of getting everything working and updating NVIDIA drivers or whatever you have to deal with. And it's gotten much better over the years, but still, like, most people that want to play games do not want to spend 15 minutes troubleshooting what just happened, which, consoles sort of fill that gap. But it is not like... I guess I was expecting from the PS4 Pro, I was expecting much more of a comparable system to what Microsoft seems to be offering, which is to say, like, it sounds like they're going to throw a ton of hardware at the problem. Speaking as someone that has been pretty unhappy with what Microsoft has done this generation, at least this feels like a noticeably different product than what they're offering right now. Whereas the PS4 Pro really... it doesn't even seem like a half step. Like, it seems almost like a quarter step to whatever their next generation console is.
Yeah, I'm really reluctant to, like, say much about Project Scorpio, though.
Yeah.
Considering we know next to nothing
Sure.
about what it will actually look like.
Yes.
And, like,
true.
other than them being like, well, PS4 Pro has 4 teraflops and we have 6.
Yeah, no, I don't. Right.
Until I see what it actually does that is better than PS4 Pro, I am kind of skeptical. I think the big advantage they have is they're gonna have 6 months before they have to show the Project Scorpio.
Scorpio,
at E3.
yeah. So right.
So like they
I
have
guess
a lot of time to like start making decisions. I mean, not a lot of time, but it feels like they have enough time to say, hey, we need to add 1 or 2 things that give us a real competitive advantage over what is available here.
Although obviously the concern is they run into the same issue they have with launch on the Xbox, which is to say, like, so the PS4 Pro is selling at $400. If Microsoft comes out at $500, $600, $800, what does that mean? And like, does that sink them? I think it is a huge issue for them if they come out again at a higher price point, because people are just going to be like, I don't, whatever. I don't need all these flops. I have enough flops.
Well, and the other thing is, it's where things get complicated with it being essentially the same games on all these systems, but with better graphics.
Yeah.
How many people are just going to be like, yeah, I guess it looks better. Like, but I'm okay with what I already have. Those people I think are on PC right now, right? Like the people who are really like obsessed with graphics, I think have a place for that.
And all these Xbox games are coming to PC. Like that's a marketing point for them, is like all of these Xbox One exclusives are coming to PC day and date.
Yeah, I feel like the thing I keep waiting for Microsoft to do with Project Scorpio or whatever they do next is not Connect, but something that makes that experience unique, right? Like what is their camera essentially for the smartphone, for the iPhone? Like every year Apple can update its camera, and everything on your iPhone is totally fine, and everybody can enjoy all their apps. Maybe they'll run a little bit better on one, but 99% of the stuff is going to run pretty similarly across like the 3 most recent iPhones. Yeah. But for people who really want that camera, like there's a reason to buy the phone every year. And that's what I'm curious about with Project Scorpio, is like, why do I buy this system if I have a good PC? Or on the flip side, I'm like okay just having pretty serviceable graphics on Xbox One or Xbox One S.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be a tough sell for them, and I think there are people, hardcore gaming folks, honestly, like me, that like wants to have steady performance on PS4, and $400, is cheaper than I was expecting it to be. So I don't know that I'm going to get one at launch, but it is sort of appealing, and I'm sort of in wait and see mode with Scorpio then. I do want to mention that we were talking about improvements. You were just saying improvements that Microsoft can make year over year. I wanted to talk about one such improvement that recently came to the Xbox One, but has obviously been on PCs for a little while, I guess since Windows 10. And her name is Cortana, the Halo robot.
Hello, Halo robot.
Cortana is a voice interpretation AI, I guess, that takes orders similar to Siri and Amazon's Alexa. And I never used her on Windows because why would I? But it recently came to Xbox One, and I use the Xbox as a media box. So I actually use voice controls pretty frequently. I've used them since launch. They are not great, but I was kind of hoping that Cortana would sort of right the ship there. Now, before, I would say Kinect voice controls worked maybe 50% of the time if things were ideal. Cortana seems to work 60% of the time.
Oh, that's nice.
But that's nice. She takes about 15 seconds to get my video to stop.
Not as nice.
It's literally, this is the interaction I have. So I'm watching Netflix. I say, hey, Cortana, stop. And then she thinks about it for a while. And then she makes a tea. And then she comes back. And she's like, did you mean snap? And then she snaps. And I want to throw my Xbox out the window. Like, it is like Xbox, they've made some good improvements to that dashboard since launch. Cortana is in an awful state that never, ever, ever should have come to the forefront.
Do you think maybe that is like the... Wait, is this on Xbox One or Xbox One S?
It's on both.
It's slow on both?
I don't know if it's slow on both, but my interpretation is that it's not that it's because it's all like calculating in the cloud.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's a network connection thing. It has nothing to do with the system power. And that's
Okay.
the big issue, is that my interpretation is that every single thing that you say to Cortana has to go to the cloud before it can come back and be interpreted. Whereas the logic would say, hey, here are these 60 words that people use on the regs. Maybe throw them into the hardware memory. Maybe you don't need to go to the cloud to figure out if they said play or not.
Yeah.
And instead, they're so tied into this idea of cloud computing or whatever the hell that they've totally hamstrung a feature that I use all the time. I mean, it's honestly like removing the headphone jack. Like, why have you done this to me? It has not benefited me in any way, shape, or form.
I'm just impressed that you're still talking to your Xbox.
It's laziness generally. I mean, it's the remote is out of reach, and I'm willing to yell at it instead of reaching for the remote. But at this point, I can't even do that. So
your
it's
Kinect
like,
is still plugged in.
remarkably,
Wow.
yeah, it is. I know, it's shocking. I don't know. It's just there for the mic. I'd almost say like they should have just sold like a USB mic attachment for people that wanted to do that.
Isn't that an option now?
Well, you can just, I guess, plug in a headphone into the controller and do it that way. But
then you have to find your controller.
God, yeah, things are in a very weird state with I think both of the console manufacturers. There's a third one, isn't there? Does another company make consoles as well?
So here is, I think this could be an opportunity for Nintendo.
I completely agree. Totally agree.
I think all of this, like, it's so complex, so headache-inducing. Anytime somebody asks me to figure out how HDR works, like, I literally, my eyes glaze over, and I just
want to
leave
boop
the room.
Goombas. Let me boop Goombas.
What if I told you there were two formats and they only worked on certain TVs and you were never really sure if they were even working? Like, have you ever tried to watch something? Wait, do you have 4K?
No.
Okay.
I'm too far from my TV to, I think, visually recognize the difference between 4K and not. Like,
yeah.
I looked at that chart where it was like, I'm, 7 feet away from my TV, and it's too much. Like, I wouldn't be able to see it.
That's HDR, I feel like, was built for when people like you walk into the showroom. So they can be like, well, what if I told you could have a gajillion more colors?
And I'm colorblind, so it's like, sorry.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I do feel like Nintendo has a real shot here. Between its sudden renaissance of popularity on mobile phones, and just the simplicity of the NX. I mean,
well, we don't know how simple it is, but it probably is comparatively
we
simple.
can assume that it's not going to have like 3 different models for you to choose from.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think my crackpot theory. People have always been asking for the Netflix of Nintendo games, right? That you could like have
since
every
the
Nintendo
Dreamcast
game.
era, right?
Yeah, like everything from Nintendo, and it'd be great. They should partner with Sega, put it all into this system, and you pay a fee a month. But judging from how much attention the NES Classic Edition has got, which if you haven't seen this, it's a tiny recreation of the original NES with 60, I think, games preloaded onto it.
Yeah, it's we've talked about it a little bit on the show. It's definitely, I think, going to be a huge holiday gift.
Yeah, I know Nintendo loves reselling classic games to you over Wi-Fi or over your internet connection. But my fantasy for, I guess, NX would be that it comes with 100 games on it. Like that, it's like you get this, and hey everyone who now has kids that grew up on the NES, here is to start, introduce your family to the joy of Nintendo. Like that's the whole angle. And then here is a system that you can have in your home, you can take on on the go, and here are all these games to start with. And then on top of it, like, here's the new Mario that you're going to want to buy. It just feels like it's such an advantage they have. Just so many old games that they could stack on, and there would still be more games for you to buy.
Yeah.
That I just...
Would they be willing to rid themselves of that potential income source, though, is the question. Yeah. I completely agree that's, from a business model standpoint, super, super smart. Especially if they have trouble with stocking the mini micro Nintendo. Like, this seems like another alternative, but Nintendo has so like held on to that arcane method of like reselling you old NES games for $15 a pop that I don't know. We'll see. I'm eager to find out.
Yeah, I just feel like they have to come up with some better solution for their classic titles. Like, whether it be that or it be the Netflix thing, I just don't think they can, for the umpteenth time, resell people, a 30-year-old game for $10 or $15.
Yeah.
And this would be a great way to, like, fix that problem. Because I do think a lot of people, if they don't find a way to transfer your games from the Wii and Wii U to this new system, like, I will be upset if they try to get me to pay for Super Mario 3 yet again.
Exactly.
Or Super Metroid, which I feel like I bought on 4 different systems.
Countless systems. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Okay, well, I wanted to wrap the show talking a little bit about football.
Okay.
I was flying home on a red eye last night. I landed at 6 a.m. this morning, and I'm very sleepy. But while I was waiting for my flight last night, I was watching the football match last night between the Carolina Panthers and the
Denver Broncos. It was heartbreaking.
The Orange Gentlemen.
Sure.
The Denver Broncos. And I saw you tweeted about this. There was a moment very late in the game when Cam Newton, their star quarterback, was given a concussion in front of the America's like eyes. It was horrifying, like this shot that he took to the head. And I mean, you watch football, I do fantasy football, you do fantasy football. How long can you sort of do this before it just gets so terrifying?
So I have to tell you, I tweeted something. What was most, well, I don't know if it was what was most offensive to me. I think the NFL just not caring at all about this man who clearly looks concussed, trying to still play for another minute was pretty disturbing. But also what happened on that play was he took this helmet-to-helmet shot right at his head. They didn't call it helmet-to-helmet, and he got an intentional grounding on it, probably because he was getting hit in the head by another man's helmet.
It was a personal foul, wasn't it?
The two fouls equaled out. Right. So they offset. So basically what the NFL's logic was, this man almost had his neck snapped in half. And that is equal to, penalty-wise, him intentionally grounding the football. Again, which could have been a result of him not knowing where he was anymore. That seems especially silly. But yeah, I tweeted that, and immediately it got retweeted by like some MMA editor and like Bleacher Report, and it was like, oh, somebody got hurt in sports. Whoop-de-doo. Like, of course, there are still people in the world who, like, a person gets seriously injured, and it's like, well, that's the expectation. They get paid millions. If they die, it's their own fault. Like, it's such an ugly attitude that, like, I'm surprised is still so pervasive towards athletes. That, like,
also, I feel like MMA is interesting because you don't hear a lot about this stuff, and it must be because the fights, I guess, are so short that, like, I don't know that there's like a lot, or I guess the sport is much newer, so they don't have a lot of the history of potential long-term damage, whereas boxing obviously does, and football does.
Yeah, I think there's also an attitude sometimes across like everything in modern American culture of if something owns up to something, it's somehow okay.
What do you
It's
mean?
like Donald Trump. Like if you say it's like, well, he's just a straight talker. Like if Hillary Clinton or any politician basically before him said something racist, people would like lose their minds.
Sure.
But because he like basically is like, yeah, I mean, this is just who I am. People are like, well, I mean, what could we expect? Of course.
How does that apply to the NFL though?
Well, what I'm saying, no, I was talking about MMA. I think like people are okay with MMA because it's like, well, I mean, it's always been a blood sport. Like, what do you expect? Like, it's totally okay. And I think the trouble that the NFL is going through is in the 90s, like in the NFL Blitz era, it like kind of seemed to take a pride in
100%.
and like, oh man, this thing is nuts. And then as the seriousness of the injuries and deaths has kind of taken center stage, the NFL has had to kind of pivot away from just leaning into it.
Yeah.
and weirdly now it doesn't really know how to handle itself.
Well, it's funny because I watch Hard Knocks on HBO, and Hard Knocks, if you've not seen it, is like a really great documentary series about following a single team during their preseason. And I say great, but I also fully realize that like Hard Knocks is very, very intentionally does not delve into a lot of like the concussion stuff.
Oh, it doesn't delve into anything complicated.
I mean, they'll show like a guy tore his ACL or something like that, but in terms of like long-term, damage or it's very surface. It's not like a super, but it does. I would say more so than any other thing that I've watched. It does humanize the players on these teams, and it's ironic because it is designed to humanize the players and make you more excited to watch them play football. But in truth, all it does is make me more horrified when they get horribly injured on the field. Yeah.
No, I do think you're right in that it uses the power of reality TV to make you feel an affection for really the sport in general.
Yeah.
What I loved is this year they followed the Los Angeles Rams, who I despise as an idea.
Just because they moved?
Yeah, well, not because they moved, but just the whole idea of using...
Missouri boy over here.
Yeah, using a team to leverage a city to pay for stadiums is, like, grotesque.
Yeah, it's pretty awful.
And they are, I think, like, the beacon of all of that behavior in the NFL. And then you watch this show and you're like, oh, yeah, I mean, I hate what they represent, and I know they're, like... A city team that somehow is also kind of the NFL's team because that stadium is going to be used for like special NFL things that are like separate from the own team, which creates this weird conflict of interest for me of like, cool, it's a standalone team, but the NFL also uses its like space for its own stuff.
How could that conspiracy? Deflategate 2?
It's like not even a conspiracy because it's just the NFL. They're just like, yeah, this is what we do. It's exactly what I was talking about. They're just like, we own it. No problems here.
Yeah.
And yet, you watch the show and then you're like, oh, I could really see myself.
This guy has a lot of tank tops.
Yeah, this coach, he really knows how to keep these guys together.
Yeah, it's tough mental gymnastics that I have to go through every year, and it looks like I'm still going through it. So I'm certainly not out of the blame field. If I wanted to assuage myself, I would have to quit watching football, and I really like watching football. So make the helmets better. That's all I'm going to say, and that fixes everything. Chris, is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we wrap things up?
No, I mean, I think that's it. Nothing's coming to mind. Do you have anything?
No, I really don't. Is there anything that you'd like to plug as a member of The Verge?
Sure. TheVerge.com.
Okay.
It's a technology and culture website for the modern age. You can also I have a podcast.
Okay.
It's called What's Tech. It's on all of your favorite podcast catchers, and it's short, so that's why I recommend it. Each week,
is there an episode of the podcast that you would recommend for people to start with?
So each week we cover like just one topic, and they're like 15 to 20 minute nuggets. And there's an episode about fan fiction that I think is pretty tasty. There's an episode on doxing, which I think is really informative. And any of our space episodes, like if it's like, oh, alien life or space colonization or rockets. All those episodes, we have my friend and colleague Lauren Grush on it. And 95% of them just end up being conversations about Nick Cage film Knowing, which if you haven't seen, one you
Is
should
that the one
watch.
with the numbers?
Yes, kind of.
And the plane?
So
it's like a plane?
the end of the movie, there's a terrible plane crash. The end of the movie, I'm going to spoil it for everybody. So
Thank you.
Turn it off
Please do.
if you're worried about spoilers. The end of the movie is Nick Cage can sense that bad things are about to happen, and it all leads to these numbers are the clue, and it leads to just like the end of the list. And the end is the apocalypse. And
Bummer.
he actually doesn't get off planet Earth, and the entire planet is engulfed in flames, and everybody dies, except for a few children, including, I believe, like his friends' children or his children, and they get taken away by aliens, except when we see them, like, post-Earth's termination.
Sure.
They're on another planet, and it's clearly the Garden of Eden, and the aliens look like angels. So we're led to believe that
it's a prequel to our lives, essentially.
Yes, this is that God and angels are actually this alien race, and every time Earth begins to like its timer expires, we get like a few of us are airlifted out, and we re-Edenify a different planet.
And the implication is that the children need to bang?
I mean, I am not the person who said that. That was you who said that. But, I mean, you should...
I mean, God is making that leap. Like, well, let's just stick a bunch of children in this garden and hope for the best.
Not God. Space aliens with wings.
Yeah, but God is he's the chief of them, right?
I mean, well...
God alien.
I'll let you be, the
space jockey.
Theologian.
Theologian, sure.
Sure. Yeah. Anyway,
Okay.
That's my plug.
Lovely. The Knowing and Chris Plante, What's Tech. Thank you very much, Chris, for joining us. And thank you so much at home for joining us for this very special non-Jeff episode of the 404 High Tech, Lowbrow, etc. We will be back next week with another mystery guest since Jeff is still gone and I haven't booked it yet. So get excited for that. It could really be anyone. It could be Barack Obama.
Could be
it
me
could
again.
be, I don't know, Tim Cook could be here defending the iPhone head jack thing. Who knows? Anyway, we'll be back next week. Thanks again for listening. Adios.